There's a brand new movie coming out that claims the universe is designed. But should Christians actually watch this movie and engage with this movie? I'm going to answer that question for you here on this episode of the Wins of Creationist. I hope you guys are doing well. Excited to be back with you another week to dive into this topic. Well, as you probably know, if you listen to this podcast or watch me on YouTube, I am a young age creationist. Okay, so that means that I believe the earth and the universe are somewhere on the order of 6 to 7,000 years old. And this is a claim that, to be sure, flies in the face of mainstream science in general. Geology, astronomy, genetics, biology, archaeology, most of these disciplines are united on the fact that the earth is 6 to 7,000 years old. And for a long time, Christians have held this position too. And as you also probably know, there are many different Christian positions or positions across the spectrum of those who believe in Christ on this issue. One of the perspectives on the issue aims to not take a biblical position at all, or even a age of the earth position necessarily outside of what mainstream science says. And the name of this view, as we often understand it, is called intelligent design. And so, as someone who believes in the ID or intelligent design movement, you could theoretically hold a wide range of positions on the age of the earth. You could be a young earth creationist who just believes in the general theory of intelligent design. You could be an old earth creationist who believes in the theory of intelligent design in general. And depending on where you land on that spectrum, you're going to have an easier or harder time making sense of some of the claims that are made to there being design in the universe. And I think this is actually one of the things that most people don't understand. For example, there are some arguments for the fine tuning of the universe that actually depend on Big Bang cosmology to be true. So there are certain teleological arguments that you can't use, teleological meaning design. There are certain teleological arguments that a young earth creationist will not necessarily be able to use because they don't actually comport with their understanding of the age of things, okay? And that actually matters. But there's this new movie coming out that promotes this intelligent design position. And it's based on the work of Dr. Stephen Meyer, arguably the leading figure in the intelligent design movement. He runs an organization called the Discovery Center out on the West Coast. And he wrote a book a few years back called The Return of the God Hypothesis. Now, here's where I have to confess, I have not actually read this book. In fact, this might shock some of you. I've actually never read a Stephen Meyer book from cover to cover. I have seen bits and pieces, and I appreciate his work. I've read articles that he's written. I've watched plenty of interviews, including his nearly 3-hour long, if I remember correctly, interview that he did with Joe Rogan. It was fantastic. But I have lots of friends, both young earth creationists and not, who have read his book, The Return of the God Hypothesis. And, you know, except for the normal, fairly standard areas of disagreement, find what he has to say very interesting. And a new movie is coming out, a documentary style movie coming out into theaters at the end of this month, April 2026, called The Story of Everything. And the story of everything is largely based on his book called The Return of the God Hypothesis. And what it aims to do is present for popular audiences a look at the universe from the standpoint of intelligent design, and saying that whatever you think about the details, about the specifics of the age of the earth, of the universe, of all the different disciplines of science that you could look at, whatever you want to think about those, you can't escape the fact that these elements look designed. They don't look like the product of random chance happening over billions of years of unguided and undirected evolution. And so this movie's coming out, the story of everything. And there's a real question in the minds of many. Should, if you're a young age creationist, if you're in my audience, should you, number one, go see this movie? Number two, should you recommend to others that they go see this movie? So I'll be honest, I hadn't necessarily planned to comment on this. And then I saw a Facebook post written by a friend of mine that was making the point that as a young earth creationist, if you go see this movie, you may end up being confused about it. And it's, basically, it was a call to pastors. I'm going to read it to you, so I don't want to get too into the details. But it was basically a call to church leaders saying, "Look, your people are going to go see this movie. They're going to know people who go see this movie, and it's going to sound wonderful, like there's all this design in the universe. But then, they're going to get hit with the fact that this was all caused by the Big Bang, and where's that going to leave people, etc." So I wanted to have a conversation about this, and so I actually wrote an article about it. We're going to use that article as the basis for the rest of our discussion. So let me go ahead and get us over there right now. And so here's the question that I'm attempting to answer here: is the story of everything, this movie, is it actually helpful or hurtful for Christians? And I do think this is something that we need to talk about. And I wanted to bring it to you in the form of this of the podcast and YouTube as well. All right, so new movie coming to theaters, Fathom Entertainment. I believe that is actually the same people who helped bring Is Genesis History to theaters as well. I could be wrong about that. I'm almost certain that they helped bring the Genesis Paradise Lost film to theaters. So they have a way. I guess they're a Christian or family-friendly based company that sort of has an in with movie theaters and has a way of getting movies into the theaters that maybe wouldn't normally get there. So the film's based on a groundbreaking work by the Discovery Institute's Stephen Meyer, The Return of the God Hypothesis. And so Pat, my Facebook friend, and had some great conversations with him in real life as well, shared a Facebook post sort of expressing some concerns about it. So here's what he had to say. The story of everything is coming to theaters April 30th. The movie will focus on the design we see throughout the universe. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? However, many Christians will go to this movie and walk away confused. Here's the reason why. The movie will present the idea that all things were created by a Big Bang. I would take maybe a little bit of issue with the way this is phrased, that all things were created by a Big Bang. But actually, I'm not going to take as much issue with that framing as you might think, and it'll become a little bit more clear why later. Keep reading. And while they appear to be using incredible animations to show the complexity of life, they attribute it to an intelligence directing the forces of matter and matter spewed out from the Big Bang. Sadly, this goes against the biblical account in Genesis. While trying to combine the ideas of those that propose a strictly material origin of the universe with the idea of an intelligent designer, they miss all the true scientific evidence against the Big Bang and for the Genesis account. Pastors, many in your church will see this movie. Christians, many in your family and friends will be taken in by the breathtaking imagery supporting the claims made by this movie. Would you like to be better equipped to have answers? And he talks about his Creation Quest team, believes there's such an important moment in time. Want to make sure that you're equipped to answer these questions. So our Genesis Experience program addresses the very issues covered in the movie, yet focuses on the truth of the Bible. This interactive presentation is designed especially with families in mind, can be presented at your church, Christian school, homeschool co-op. If you like a more traditional talk, we can do a presentation on this issue. We don't require an honorarium to invite us. Please message us. Now, as I mentioned here, as I read in the article or write in the article, I'm okay with this in general, right? Like I largely agree with his position here that, yeah, this is a movie that will take a certain position on the age of things, whether or not it means to. And more broadly, it takes a position on the issues of design. And if I have the goals right of this movie, I don't think that they are going to draw a line. In fact, I'm certain that they're going to draw a line somewhere different than where a young earth creationist would draw a line. But this is where it starts to get a little awkward because I've actually had to deal with this exact same criticism before. Years ago now, 7 years ago, I think is when I initially started engaging in this with the Is Genesis History movie. And I'm going to go back to the article here and we'll kind of look through this together. I make the point that this movie has different goals than those of us who believe that the age of the earth matters. And I've had to actually defend a creationist movie in the past from this same criticism. And because I've defended the creationist movie for this reason, now I feel like I also have to defend the intelligent design movie. And that's going to become all the more clear to you why. So the line of design, I write this, let's not bury the lead any further. I am a young age creationist. This movie is not going to take that position. And while it will likely not make a big deal out of the Earth's age, for sure it will rely on the conclusions of mainstream scientists. And this will, and intentionally so, leave some with the impression, oh, I thought as a Christian, I had to believe that the Earth was young. I guess I was wrong. And that's the point. I mean, this movie will draw a line in the sand, and the line in the sand that they're drawing is not the age of things. That line is design. Design. Now, that really matters. I wrote this article about 7 years ago, a long blog post responding to a critique by Luke Nix. I think he actually, the version I saw had been republished, I think, on the Cross-Examined blog. It was a critique of the Is Genesis History movie. And some of you may or may not know the history here, but basically in the movie, Paul Nelson, one of the folks who works with Stephen Meyer at the Discovery Institute, dissented from his role. And at the time, this was a very sort of salient thing, and it matters now as well, because Nelson himself is a young age creationist, actually. And Nelson argued that the Is Genesis History movie presented a false dichotomy. And if you search for the term false dichotomy and Is Genesis History, I bet you'll see tons of articles and videos. They really latched onto this phrase that Paul himself used. And the argument was basically that by leaving out a large swath of Christians who accept variations of old earth and evolutionary teaching, the film presented what ultimately amounts to a false choice between young earth creationism and atheism. And there's a whole video that I have responding also to Gavin Ortland, who made this point as well. And he was really concerned about this, very concerned that if the viewer is presented a choice between essentially atheism and young earth creationism, a lot of people are going to choose atheism. And that's a concern. And folks were very upset that this movie did not have the nuance in it of another position. So here's how I responded to Luke. I said, look, prima facie, it's pretty easy to see his concern. He, as do all progressive creationists, want a seat at the table, and they believe that others should have it as well. And then I made the point that I believe is sort of the crux of the whole issue. I say, but this wasn't their movie. This wasn't their movie, okay? This wasn't a progressive creationist movie. This wasn't an intelligent design movie, right? This wasn't an evolutionary creationist movie. They could all go create their own movies, okay? This was a movie made by some very sweet people that I've had great fellowship with, people who are not what you'd think of when you typically think of a young earth creationist, right? They're not the mean kind. They're very winsome creationists who created this movie. And that's who this movie belonged to. So I said this, which, boy, this is just so crazy. I said, had this been the Discovery Institute's movie, where Nelson is affiliated, they would have likely drawn a line between themselves and theistic evolutionists. Indeed, they draw this line almost daily throughout their publications and held nothing back in their 2018 release of the ironically titled tome, Theistic Evolution. By drawing this line, progressive creationists and age-agnostic ID proponents are not claiming theistic evolutionists are not Christians. Rather, they're deciding to place their theological stake in the ground on a particular issue and creating materials which advance views on their side of the stake and critically evaluate views on the other side. And I said this, let's be clear that this is exactly what the IGH movie is attempting to do. The Discovery Institute draws the line at design versus no design. And any movie they made would surely reflect that. IGH draws the line at a particular understanding of history, and thus, IGH is Genesis history, by the way, and thus they created a movie which reflects that. So, could the IGH movie better, say, presented this wide range of spectrums? Well, perhaps. And I really think that that's all Paul Nelson would have, been pining for. Basically, I don't know that he ever would have issued that retraction if not for the fact of this false dichotomy. And if I'm being honest with you, having had some interactions with Paul Nelson, I mean, not that I don't believe he's genuine, I 1000% believe he's genuine, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was internal conversations and pressure. I could be totally wrong about that. I'm just throwing it out there. I would not be surprised if there was an internal, conversations that went somewhat along the lines of like, yeah, Paul, you should probably distance yourself from this movie. That would be a good idea. And the thing is, though, surely you couldn't fault Is Genesis History for publicly opposing views that they believe have implications for the gospel and then critiquing them as such just because someone with the opposing view doesn't believe so, right? Like the folks who made Is Genesis History shot hundreds of hours of footage and had to fit everything into an hour and a half long movie, basically. If you're going to do that, it is your right to go to the cutting room floor and you're going to spend all this money. You're going to work on all this distribution. You're going to use the time by all these different scientists and people that you have to, to get together. You got an hour and a half. You're not going to spend the time unless you're aiming to make a view critiquing all the different views of creation. Unless that's the movie you're trying to make, you're not going to spend the time doing that. I write this: progressive creationists and ID proponents most often join the young age creationists in harsh criticism of theistic evolution, including its implications for the gospel, lest we think the robust theological section of the theistic evolution book was written merely because the Discovery Institute prefers their understanding of the gospel over the theistic evolutionists. Therefore, I argue that yes, the Is Genesis History dichotomy does exist, but it's not fallacious. It's drawn precisely because young age creationists like myself hold a strong conviction that accurate history, which is where we draw the line, also has implications for the gospel, not merely God's chosen method of bringing about the natural order. Now, here we are. I find myself in this somewhat awkward position of now having to defend the Story of Everything movie from the inevitable attacks. And I'm not saying that what Pat was doing was attacking. Not one bit. Okay. I'm just saying that the conversation's already starting to happen. Okay. And so now I want to make sure that everyone who, under the sound of my influence and voice, at least, is aware of what's really going on here. Okay. So putting it plainly, two things have happened. First, in the writing, in the time since writing the blog response, the Discovery Institute now has produced their own movie, right? It's coming out, The Story of Everything. And guess what? Just like I said, it draws the line at design, not age. In fact, I have good reason, which we're going to talk about. I have good reason to think that there will not even be a mention of the age of the earth. If there is one, it will probably be something like, hey, you might have thought that as a Christian, you had to believe the earth is young. There are some Christians who think the earth is young, but that's not true. Blah, 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 blah. But you don't have to believe that. Blah, 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 blah. Something along those lines, I would guess, is going to be in there. And by the way, I'm not faulting them, as you're getting ready to see. Fine. This does not have to be a movie about young earth creationism. Okay, it just doesn't. So my question is this: will those who cried with outrage due to an unfair presentation of the available options in the Is Genesis History movie also do that now that it's their movie and their choice of paradigm? Okay, so they get to draw the line at design versus no design. They don't think the age of things matters. Okay, fine. That's their view. That's their movie. I think the age of things matters. I think the Is Genesis History people think that the age of things matters. Okay, by the way, total side note related to one of the presentations in a lecture series associated with the Is Genesis History event is a video on YouTube by Kurt Wise called The Age of Things. And if you're ever wondering why some people believe it's very important to be a young age creationist, that's a great place to start. That is one of the best videos I've ever watched on the subject. The Age of Things by Dr. Kurt Wise, presentation from the IGH lecture series. All right, secondly, creationists have already started latching onto this concern and leveling the exact same critiques at this movie that were leveled against IGH, and this is only the beginning. And I really think this is an important point I want to make here. Pat, the person who I quoted earlier from the Facebook post, is one of the more gracious and kind defenders of young age creationism that I personally know. I love the guy, like totally great guy. So just wait until the peanut gallery gets in on it, right? Like people are gonna start talking about this, and I think that a lot of this critique that you're gonna start seeing from young Earth creationists is, boy, they sure don't mention young Earth creationism in this movie, and my response to that is they don't have to mention young Earth creationism in the movie, just like in Genesis history didn't have to mention intelligent design, progressive creationism, theistic evolutionism, whatever. Okay. Now, again, I'm trying to be fair here. Pat probably had no idea about these specific criticisms against the IGH movie that are eerily similar to his view of the Discovery Institute movie. And if he did have an idea about the criticisms, he certainly, I'm sure, didn't know about my article. So this blog post is not really about him or a response to his post so much as it is about calling ourselves to a very high standard as creationists and gaining the most complete picture of these efforts that are going on. So what then is the point of this movie? What's the point? Okay, you're not going to go into the specifics of different biblical positions on creation. It's not a creationism movie. So what's the point? Well, let me give one helpful clarification. Of course, this movie isn't out yet, and I haven't seen it. I have not previewed it. I know it's been in the works for a long time. And I suppose it's possible that everything I've said so far is wrong, but I very highly doubt it if history is any guide. And if you are a contributor to this and you're watching, contributor to the movie, or you've seen it already in a pre-screening or something, and I'm getting something wrong, please let me know. I'll be happy to correct the record. But I'll give you what I think here and some evidence to support my contention as well. I don't think the point of this film is evangelism. In other words, I don't, strictly speaking, think that the point of this film is to say God, the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, created the universe, and the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, died on the cross to cover the atonement necessary for your sins, and you should now accept this gospel, this good news, and accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, so that you can be saved and live now and for eternity with Him. Okay, that would be sort of the evangelistic view of this movie, and I don't think that's what's going to happen. And here's what may surprise you. I don't personally consider that to be a bad thing. Not every movie can be evangelism, and a lot of the stuff that tries to be just ends up being sort of corny and counterproductive. Okay, I'm all for evangelism, of course, but not everything needs to just jump straight into an evangelistic message. And I do think the timing, at least from a human perspective, might be a coincidence, but this movie does also happen to be landing during a major renaissance of faith that's happening in our culture. And so, like, the bankruptcy of the new atheism is on full display right now. Like, people are returning to God in droves, and this book titled The Return of the God Hypothesis really works well for the moment. And this movie, The Story of Everything, sort of working through the content of this book at a very high level. It's a great time, frankly. It almost feels God ordained, if you will, in a way. And my guess is that among the droves that are returning to faith, there's probably some who remain pretty skeptical of how science and faith can work together. Maybe they feel like something's missing, and religion has been outpaced by science. They can't quite see themselves making the move yet, or whatever. I think this movie is going to try to answer some of those concerns and show that not only do science and faith work together, but that they can't work without one another. And I believe this happens to be true, okay? Even if you are an older age creationist or whatever, like whatever view you take, you can't have that without God. That's my view. And so I could assume, and we'll talk about this, but I could assume the old age creationist worldview for the sake of a conversation and show you how God is required even for that. Now, of course, when we get to the Bible, I'm going to have very extensive disagreement with that position, and I can argue it. But regardless of how you see that, like if you're trying to come to faith, if you're a person who's interested in faith and religion and, um, you know, coming to Christ because you feel like something's missing in your life, um, then that's I think, helpful thing for somebody to sort of remove that stumbling block. And like I say, if we're arguing for biblical theology, I'm obviously going to take major issue with this movie's approach, but this movie will not argue biblical theology. It's really not their style. And in fact, the official announcement of the movie makes this explicit. It says this: intelligent design should not be conflated with what is typically defined as creationism. There you have it. Intelligent design limits itself to what can be known from the observation of nature. It does not try to interpret the Bible or base its findings on the biblical text. Now, again, take from this and believe from this what you will, but I appreciate this. Why? Why do I appreciate this? Because at least they're being upfront about it. Okay. They are not at all attempting to do any sort of biblical theology or creationism or whatever. They are not arguing for a view of science that can be somehow reconciled with the biblical account. Although any individual person who is, considers themselves in the spectrum of ID will certainly have biblical positions on things and how it maps to science. The project of the Discovery Institute as an ID intelligent design organization doesn't go so far as to try to interpret the Bible or base its findings on the biblical text, even though you could have a great and wonderful theology conversation with most of the people associated, and Bible conversation as well. Now, I also happen to know that some people who are just on the spectrum of Christian apologetics will be commenting on this film, notably Lee Strobel. And as I write in the article, I just can't imagine a movie with Lee Strobel that has zero gospel and Bible connections into it. So I'll be interested to see how that ends up playing out. How I think that's going to play out is that this movie will be framed more as pre-evangelism, which is the term that I believe was coined by Francis Schaeffer, than evangelism, as is often discussed in the apologetics community. And this pre-evangelism is the idea of essentially clearing the way for belief instead of inviting one to belief directly. Again, I could be wrong about that, but I think that's going to be the framing. Now, here's the framing I'd like to see. I would love it if they'd frame it this way. I don't share your exact worldview. I think the Bible teaches a different timeline for Earth history that changes how we think about everything. But assuming your worldview, for the sake of argument, you still need God to make it work, and here's how. And I made the point that I would actually love to see a documentary or a film made by young age creationists that take this position. And maybe if nobody else does it, one of these days I'll add it to my slate and try to get that done, right? I would love for a young Earth creationist to say, look, right at the outset, hear me out. I'm a young Earth creationist, but I'm going to do my best to argue your position and say that even as a young Earth creationist, if I were to look at your position as an old age creationist, you still need God, right? You still need a biblical worldview in order to make it work. I think there's something there that could be a compelling way of looking at things that would broaden the conversation a little bit. So let's get to the point, really, of the initial post of this article, of all the responses back and forth, and ultimately this episode that you're watching / listening to right now. How should we, as creationists, think about this movie? Or should you encourage your church to go see it, or should you go see it yourself? Now, if you're reading this article or listening to this video, should you go see this movie? I would say probably. You probably should. There's a very good chance, if that's the case, that you're the kind of person who would be just fine seeing a movie like this. You're not going to get confused about what you believe. You're going to probably, hopefully, appreciate this movie for what it is instead of being upset about what it isn't. Okay? That's the view, by the way, that I would encourage you to adopt when it comes to most things, but for sure this issue. Okay, you could be mad that all intelligent design people are not young age creationists. That's fine. That's your prerogative. I would encourage you to adopt a little bit different mindset. So, I'm going to go see this movie and I'm going to go look at it and I'm going to be grateful for what they've done here. And I'm going to see how I could maybe add this to my tool belt when it comes to evangelism and apologetics discussions, and see if the information that is contained in this movie, in the book that the movie's based on, etc., could be something useful. And instead of being mad about what's not in the movie, be grateful about what the movie does. Now, if you're the kind of person who has influence and you're unsure whether to recommend that other people go see the movie, or, if you're a church leader and your church teaches young age creationism, I would still recommend going to see the movie for yourself and then make a recommendation on whether or not people who depend on you for spiritual counsel and insight actually should go see it or not. And I don't know, this might be like a one night only kind of thing. And typically they'll offer a reprise or a reprise. I don't know the right way to say that, but a second showing, a month or two later, if the initial night goes well. Typically, that kind of thing happens in sort of the Fathom events universe, if I'm remembering correctly. So even if you go see it the first time, before you make a recommendation to people who depend on you for these sorts of things, there should be a second opportunity for them to go see it in theaters. And there's also a chance that it will, come out pretty soon for purchase, DVD or something like that. DVD, listen to me. Come out for purchase in some way for you to download it from streaming or something like that. And so there will be opportunities for people to see this movie. And so you should see it first to see whether or not you would recommend it. And if you feel in your wisdom and discernment that it's wise to recommend going to see this movie, even if just to learn how to use this line of thinking as an evangelism tool, then please consider whether or not you need to prime your invitees in some way, and then make a decision accordingly. And look, if you feel like you might, in fact, need to do that, to prime them, but you're not 100% confident on how to do that, then 1000% you should probably consider inviting Pat and his team over at Creation Quest to come over and do a Genesis experience. It's a very cool kind of show. It's not like your standard, young earth creationist presentation. I think the initial seeds of this were developed by Pat and our mutual friend Kyle, and they did a great job putting this show together. And it's a wonderful event. So you should definitely consider bringing it into your church if you would like to help be primed on some of these issues. And I'll read the conclusion of the article here. As ostensibly my fellow creationist, I simply want to call you to a place of excitement for the tides that are shifting in our culture. As I've argued in plenty of places, we still have lots to do in terms of bringing more people into creationism, but it's way more important that they become followers of Jesus first. I absolutely think that movies like this can be used to help foster that belief. While we should be discerning about these matters, I do think the Lord can use it for his glory, and I believe even that in this case, he will. So that's what I have to say about this new movie coming up, The Story of Everything. Should you go see it? If you're under the sound of my voice right now, yep, you should probably go see it. If you are trying to figure out whether you should make a recommendation to other people, I would still encourage you to go see it first before recommending it, and then consider whether or not you need to actually, prime those who depend on you for wise spiritual counsel to go see it or not. I think that this movie is going to be a net positive for Christianity, for religion as a whole, for people as a whole. I think there's going to be, regardless of how, biblical it gets or evangelistic it gets, I think that the people in this movie, I know many of the contributors that are going to be in it, not personally, but I know of them, or I've had one-off discussions with them here and there. I think that this movie will be a net positive. It's being produced by people who do love the Lord, who do love Jesus, even if they disagree with my take on the creationism issue and my biblical understanding of it. And, even if they disagree with the extent to which evangelism should be included in their outreach efforts. But let's be careful, now that the shoe is on the other foot, not to criticize these people unduly for not including a young earth creationist position in their movie, when they don't have to do any such thing. It's their movie. They draw the line at design, not age. And again, let's see if we can band together and appreciate it for what it is, instead of being upset with it for what it isn't. Okay. God bless. Hope you guys take care. And when the movie comes out, which I think is April 30th in theaters, I hope you enjoy it. I hope I enjoy it too. And maybe we'll do an after movie review, talk about it later. All right. God bless you guys. Take care.